Hi, my name is Bonnie Limke. For this week's forum, we were asked to tell each other why we were involved with wildlife management for our master's degree. First, like to give you a little bit of history about me growing up. I grew up in Pearland, Texas, near Houston, and started riding lessons at age 7. I initially started into the hunter-jumper world, but I quickly converted over to dressage after bought my first horse at age 13. My parents had told me when I was 7 if I wanted a horse I'd have to save my own money, and they ended up letting me follow through on that when I was able to buy Revenue. The good thing about being involved with Revenue and focusing on dressage throughout high school was that I learned to really appreciate the care and the veterinary situations that are involved with horses, and I built a real interest in animals beyond just having a pet. Other than that, I grew up in the city, so I didn't have a lot of exposure to nature, but I did always enjoy being outdoors, particularly when I was out at the barn, and I love shooting nature photography. So I did have an interest in nature, just not a lot of specific exposure, just because of where I grew up in the city. Here's a photo of me at a riding lesson when I was about 12 years old on one of my favorite lesson horses, an Appaloosa, which is actually what Revenue ended up being later. So once I graduated from high school, I ended up going to Texas Tech University to study graphic design, which was a bachelor's degree in fine arts for design communication. And while I was there, I played polo they had like a club sport. So I played polo the whole time I was up there. And the polo club had a facility outside of town that was way out in the country. And I just loved being out at the polo club. It was so much fun seeing nature and being away from everything and so quiet. I just had never been around that. And so even though Lubbock's a relatively large city, it's about, well, at the time, this was the early 2000s, it was about 200,000 people, but it really had a small town feel having come from Houston. So when I graduated, I decided I wanted to find a similar small town feel in Texas. And I decided on San Antonio. I had visited several times and I really liked the area and the town, and there was lots of nature wrapped into the city, and it didn't feel like a big city the way that Austin or Dallas or Houston did. And I wanted to stay in Texas to be near my family. So I found a job there in San Antonio at a small design firm. After I was there, I bought a house. I fell in love with San Antonio and I never really wanted to leave. I had originally boarded what at this time is now 2 horses at a small boarding facility there in town, and it was small physically. It was not very large in acreage, but they probably had close to 100 horses crammed into this little facility. And so eventually I got tired of that and I decided to find a place where I could be out in the country. I found a small pasture boarding facility that was on almost 40 acres, and there were only 8 or 9 horses out there, so you really felt like you were out in the country. So here's just a couple photos, me playing polo on the left, and then the facility on the right with my 2 horses. Revenue is on the right, my first horse from when I was 13, and then Chili, who was one of the polo horses that I bought from the polo club when I graduated. So I really enjoyed being out in the country and just being away from the city. Um, it was very relaxing, and it really cemented my interest in having a place of my own in the country. So eventually I ended up leaving my design job and applying for a position with the San Antonio Police Department. It's a lot of different reasons, but in a nutshell, it's a much more stable career, better job opportunities, and I just couldn't live on the salary that I was living at with the design job anymore. So anyway, it worked out for the best. I ended up meeting my husband in the police academy, and shortly thereafter, I took him riding over at that same boarding facility out in the country, and just kind of we were real honest from day one and with each other on our expectations. And I told him from the beginning I wanted to live in the country, I wanted land, and I didn't want to be living in the city permanently. I wanted my horses in the backyard. Well, that relationship worked out really well. Eventually, we ended up getting married, and the longer we were together and we had these horses that we were still boarding out at this facility, the more we started helping out the elderly owners with ranch chores and fencing opportunities. And there was one summer we ended up taking care of the place for 3 months straight while they traveled around the country. And it was almost like a test drive. We really fell in love with the whole process. It's a lot of work to run a ranch and have all the chores, but we just couldn't be out there enough. We just really enjoyed being out in the country and away from the city. So we started saving our money and really seriously looking for a place of our own. This is actually on our eventual ranch. We hauled 2 of our horses out there to go on a trail ride. So my husband and Revenue are on the right, and then I'm on the left with my mom's horse, Mouse. So as we were looking for places to buy, we ended up making several offers on houses that were on 30 to 50 acres, which was, the volume of land that we could afford. The offers kept falling through, and so we ended up, just through happen chance, deciding to combine forces with some of the rest of my family, my parents and my brother and his wife, and we ended up looking for larger tracts of land. Well, as chance would have it, there was a tract that I was familiar with that I'd had in my file for over a year, and it was 192 acres, and I knew there was no way Jason and I alone could afford it, and so I'd never even bothered to go look at it. But it was in there, and we had nicknamed it the Mini Canyon Land, and it was kind of our little dream piece of property. Well, whenever my parents and everybody decided to join forces, I immediately knew the place. And Jason and I went out there, we visited in the fall, and this was actually the fall of 2009, took a ton of photos, and the family was sold from the photographs. We started working out the details, and it did take quite a bit of details just to work everything out. But we ended up buying it, and we actually sold on the property in June of 2010. And so this was what sold us. This is why we called it the Mini Canyon Land. We have a creek running along the entire property. It's almost a half mile of creek frontage on both sides, and it just carves out this little miniature canyon in a couple areas, and it's just really picturesque, and it sold my family. So then once we were landowners, now we have to figure out how to run our land, because none of my family had ever been landowners on this kind of scale. My dad had had some experience with ranching leases and whatnot, but it was kind of from a weekend warrior type of thing. I mean, very withdrawn and not a lot of hands-on management per se. So we had a long way to go. We started attending AgriLife extension classes, which the local A&M University here in Texas hosts that extension group. And we started learning about land ownership, wildlife management, and ranching. I ended up writing up a real basic management plan, and we transferred the property for the tax evaluation for the property taxes from cattle management basically over to wildlife. And that's an option here in Texas that a lot of other states don't have, but here you can select a particular species that you'd like to manage your property for, and then you do habitat requirements in order to benefit that particular species. So the six of us ended up agreeing that we could all appreciate quail, and no one had seen quail on the property, and in fact quail are in dwindling numbers in this area, and at this time we'd never seen quail anywhere. So it was really quite an experience to be able to say that we were going to manage for quail on a property that had previously been used for cattle leasing for many, many decades. So we purchased the property, and then we allowed the cattle lease to expire. After 6 months of ownership in December, it went ahead and expired. And after that, we removed, well, I mean, it's someone else's cattle because it was a lease, but they removed their cattle, and we've rested the land ever since. So we've really seen quite a few differences. The first one was that we've actually had quail sightings starting from the summer of 2013 off and on. So we actually do have a few small coveys on the property finally, which was really quite a experience. This photograph here was taken about 6 a.m. one morning, actually off our back porch. This is just a couple, maybe 30 yards off our back porch. So very exciting. And there were about maybe 10 quail in this little covey that had just kind of crept out. So very exciting. From there, we kept extending our education, and we decided to go to A&M, which is several hours away from where we live, to attend their week-long Ranch Management University, which is kind of a beginning ranch owners, managers class. And it covers all different aspects of how to cover a ranch, from wildlife to cattle to other livestock, just all kinds of different capacities. It's very educational. And what we noticed was that going through all these different training opportunities, that most of the individuals had master's or doctorates in related fields. And so I was inspired by all the classes I was attending and by their knowledge to seek that additional education myself. I'd always wanted to go into higher education, and so this just seemed like a really good direction for me to follow. So I had to consider different options for a master's degree. Obviously, I had to go online because I am a police officer and I have shift work constraints, so there was really not a way for me to go to a traditional brick and mortar school. Plus, the schools around here don't have a lot of degree programs for a master's that focus on this, so I'd be stuck driving 4 or 5 hours over to A&M, which is, here again, just really not feasible with my work constraints. So anyway, APU offered the best balance of the online access and then the wildlife management focus. Because I'm doing this mainly to extend my knowledge on how to run my own family's ranch as opposed to working with a government job, I really wanted to focus more on the wildlife management. So the next thing is ongoing education dealing with, here in this case, turkey, deer, foxes. We've just kept learning more and more about all the different species, and the perk is that we are seeing more and more species. We have up some game cameras, and at first we'd see rare sightings on just the game cameras, and now we're having regular sightings of large groups of the turkeys. We went from seeing 1 or 2 deer a year the first year that we bought the property to now, when we walk the property, we're seeing whitetail on almost every single hike that we take. So it's very exciting to see just the progress and what a few years of management has done to improve the wildlife habitat. So as far as APU goes, I ended up enrolling in 2010, so shortly after we bought the property, and I began classes. I had to take a break for a couple of years because we ended up building a house on the property, and that was a lot of stress just to manage the construction of the new house. We finally moved in March of 2013, and I started taking classes up again that summer. And so now I am set to graduate next year. I have 2 classes left, this one and one elective that I'll be taking this fall, and then my thesis class for next year. We're still attending ongoing wildlife classes through the co-ops and the other organizations, and in fact, my husband and I just attended a quail habitat seminar last month that had a lot of really knowledgeable doctorates teaching, and like I said, it just continues to inspire me, all the different knowledge that we're able to share with each other on this topic. So here's some survey photos from last fall. On the left we have, or from this fall, yes, but on the left we have the creek area. This is a little bit further north from where that miniature canyon photograph was taken, and then we do have a small pond on the property, which is seen on the right. So long-term goals for the ranch are, number 1, to convert the property from Bermuda grass, which was used for the cattle grazing, over to native prairie grasses. And in the process of doing that, we're going to enhance and develop quail habitat. They have some very specific needs that we're going to address as we're allowing those native prairie grasses to return. We'd like to increase our wildlife counts and the habitat quality for all of the species that are native. Be that turkey, the deer, other ground birds, fox. Part of this does include some species management of non-native species like the feral hogs. We do have quite a population of feral hogs, and we're working hard to try to keep their numbers in check as best we can. And then long term, we'd also like to sustainably maintain a small mixed livestock herd. Right now we have 3 horses on the property. We'd also like to add a couple of small cattle, chicken, and sheep just for our own personal use, trying to be as self-sufficient and as sustainable as possible for our family and for our own needs. So the photograph on the left was taken the fall of 2009 when we first visited the property before we bought it. This is about 8 months before we bought it. And you can tell that it's, there's some wildflowers in there. They're both spring photos. You can see the bluebonnets on the left, but there's a complete difference between the photo then and 4 years later with the photos on the right. I'm not sure why I labeled that as fall. It's not. It's going to be spring. But anyway, so you can see though, this is 2 springtime photos, and there's a vast difference in the quality of the forb variety. Basically, we've really just in essence neglected the Bermuda grass on the property and just allowed everything else to return of its own accord. And what's happened is a really wide variety of different forbs and grasses are starting to return, and they're all volunteers. At this point, we haven't had the finances or the time to do a lot of active management or active restoration, but we've done a lot of naturally allowing these items to come back and letting these seed beds just recover on their own, and they've done a fantastic job. So the next thing is personal goals. Number 1, we want to enjoy the ranch. Next, we want to maintain the house and the ranch as sustainably as possible. And then this is a big one for us. We want to educate ourselves, our family, friends, and the public about wildlife ecology and sustainability. And we want to share our love with nature with everyone else around us and with our children. So these are really important goals for us, because the more that we're able to share and let people be hands-on and experience the joys that we experience, the more that they're going to appreciate where we're coming from. And finally, a family photograph. This is Thanksgiving from a few years ago. All 6 of the landowners, plus some extra family members thrown in, and a whole lot of critters, the 3 horses, and we have 7 dogs, I think, in this photo. So this is really a family ranch, and we enjoy doing all the work as much we can ourselves. We do have a long way to go. There's still a lot of Bermuda on this ranch. Obviously, in this section you can see But we're working there, and we're making progress every year, and that's the fun part. So that is why I am following up on Masters on Wildlife Management. Thanks so much.